Welcome back to those who have joined us for previous events, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. I'm Lauren. I'm the managing director of Stop Stalking Us, which was founded by Lily Baldwin, who's an ongoing stalking survivor of 14 years and counting. We're a nonprofit that exclusively supports victims of stalking, regardless of how or if they know the person stalking them. I want to jump into our conversation today with Carrie Goldberg, who's a victim rights attorney. While this conversation doesn't replace having your own lawyer and doesn't constitute legal advice, we want to help our community better understand the legal landscape of stalking and best practices for victims seeking justice from someone who's at the epicenter of this work. So with that, Carrie, do you want to just tell us a bit about yourself, your firm, and how you got into this line of work?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm so happy to be here, Lauren, and also thrilled because we have a very wonderful acquaintance in common, Cynthia Lowen, who was the director of Netizens, which talks actually about some of our cases involving stalking and image-based sexual abuse. So yeah, my name is Carrie Goldberg. I am the owner of the victims' rights law firm, C.A. Goldberg, PLLC, and I started the firm. We're about to have our 10-year anniversary this January, so next month. And I started the firm really actually to deal with stalking. I had been the involuntary, I'd gotten this involuntary education about stalking. Although I was already a lawyer, I was in elder law, a completely different area of law, when I ended a 4-month relationship, and my ex basically said that he was going to spend the rest of his life destroying mine. And so this was in 2013. And so he had sex videos and photographs of me, and he blind copied. He would send them to me and then tell me that all these people in my life were blind copied on them, like judges and opposing counsel and stuff. He also would show up at my apartment. He tried to get my super to let him into the apartment. He said he had hacked into my work email and my personal email. He did actually access my personal email. He reached out to like 26 different friends, ex-boyfriends, parents of ex-boyfriends, my siblings' spouses, and would just spread these vicious lies about me, but also threaten them, tell them that he'd reported, everyone in my family to the IRS for tax fraud. And it just went on and on and on. Constant text messages with, telling me that he had hired 3 people with HIV to come rape me. And it was scary. It was really scary.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a perspective on what was a real threat and what wasn't. Everything felt threatening. There was no escaping it. I was looking over my shoulder and in constant pain and anxiety, every second of my life. And so many of my friends and relatives were totally not interested in helping me because they didn't want to be involved. They didn't want to be, he was targeting everyone in my orbit, as is super common. So I went and I tried to get the police involved, and they said, well, it's going to, what we now know is that it takes a lot longer for the police to get involved than it does to go and get an order of protection. So I went to get an order of protection, and the judge told me that that I had a First Amendment problem because so much of my offender's conduct was speech-based, or I wanted the judge to restrict him from sharing the new photos and stuff. And there were no laws at the time that protected me from what was called revenge porn back then. So I was scrambling in this weird, this weird world where criminal and First Amendment and internet and intimate partner abuse, all those different kinds of laws really were colliding. And And then he started falsely reporting me to the police when he made a, he also, when I got an order of protection, he counter petitioned and got one against me. And, which we see all the time also, is they harness the civil system and also the criminal justice system against victims if they're really enterprising stalkers. I started getting lawsuits. So, and so I had to get, you know, a family court lawyer who was like, I've never seen anything like this. I had to get a criminal court lawyer because I had been arrested. And he also was like, I've never seen anything like this. And so even though they both were excellent lawyers, they were dealing with something that they didn't really have a sample size to know what was normal,
Right.
what's the way to deal with this. And so when I finally got to the other side of things, the criminal garbage was withdrawn. I got my order of protection. And the whole thing had taken 6 months from the time that I broke up with him till when I got my order of protection, and I didn't have to keep seeing him in court, which was another crisis. By then my life looked nothing like it did. Like several members of my family weren't talking to me because I had brought this into their life. And I had, like, at work, I was like working at this like undisclosed location because I was scared of him coming. I had moved out of my apartment because I needed to live in a doorman building because I was scared, not just of him coming, but I was scared of him falsely reporting that I had violated the freaking fraudulent order of protection that he had gotten.
Right.
So I wanted a building that had cameras so that I could, and I would like go to the ATM at like 3 a.m. just so that I would have like a record of where I was. I would get receipts from everywhere. I have my 2013 diary, and it is like unhinged because every like moment I'm accounting for because
Right.
I'm so scared of him. And this very long answer to your question
No,
about
thank you
who I
thank
am
you for sharing all of this.
why this means so much to me. But when you're being stalked, it's not like any ordinary other kind of crime, because it is constant and repetitive and over and over and over again. And you know how there's all those like psychology experiments about like stimuli that's like rewards that are like variable rewards,
Mhm.
and how like we get really kind of like addicted to rewards when they're given on a variable schedule. This is like that, except instead of rewards, it is like punishments. You never know when it's going to come next. You never know. And so your system is in this like constant state of adrenaline and anxiety and hypervigilance. And that just like, it messes you up physically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so, I mean, we always feel this where it's like so hard to hear other people's sharing their experiences and how awful it is, and also such a relief to hear people who just get it, where you don't have to further explain that piece of it like you so often have to do with friends and family who either brush it off or don't get it, or in your case kind of cut ties, which is really tragic.
Yeah. And like, I think it's also like friends and family get fatigued because it's like they don't really get it. And I found that when I was going through it, people would say, what do you want me to do? Should I hire a hitman? Like how has this guy gotten away with doing this kind of, because a lot of them are serial stalkers. And so it's like,
Right.
especially if it's somebody that you are in a relationship with, you find out that they'd had all these other order protections against them, or all these other like hyper explosive breakups. And you're like, this is not about me. This is about this repeated way that this person deals with rejection and conflict. But like loved ones are like, why is this still going? And also like often these are in the context of abusive relationships. And I know that we're going to talk about how not all stalking is with somebody you have, you know, that the target had an intimate relationship with. But when it is, it's like it's almost always at the end of an abusive relationship. And so there already likely is alienation and isolation from the people that would be supportive. Or we know that a lot of abusive relationships don't actually end until like the 7th attempt at breakup. And so you know, like there's a lot of like, I told you to leave him and you didn't listen to me, so now I'm angry at you. And
Right.
and the, you know, the people that we need support from aren't always there because they're trying to protect themselves. They've probably legitimately been really worried and tried to help the person get out of the relationship and just are kind of like tired of being disappointed and seeing the cycle repeat.
Yeah. But it's so interesting how in that trajectory you have now become like by focusing on this with your law practice, you've become like a person that people can go to have in their corner.
Yeah, and I have a team here of people that deal with these types of cases of just unrelenting and relentless stalking and stuff. And so we really do know the patterns and the methods. And so I talk about this in my book, Nobody's Victim. It's like so much better if you kind of know what the playbook is, because there's not tons of variation in the types of behaviors. It changes a little bit, but like there's only so many behaviors that they can do. And so if you kind of know what to expect and you know what to do with it, like we started, like, you know, we get our clients to kind of expect the contact and conduct and to start to chronicle it. And so then we can use that to get the order protection or to get the violation of the order protection. So then it kind of becomes more of a like, okay, I'm expecting this, and now I have something like I can take this like really scary negative stimuli and like put it in this diary, which is kind of seems basic or pointless, but it's actually so important to like have something to do when you get one of those things, and to say, actually, this really scary thing is actually going to benefit my long-term plan of getting myself protected.
Yeah. For people who haven't either been able to or been ready to approach a lawyer, can you just talk a little bit about like the intake process when you start talking to a potential client and what that kind of like those early steps look like?
So at our law firm, we have like a few different ways to start a case, and it really does vary from place to place. And there are lots of like public interest lawyers and providers for people that can't pay money for a lawyer. But at our law firm, people interested in representation can contact us a few different ways. They can go to our website. There's a phone number, 646-666-8908, and they can call or leave a message. We'll call them back. They can also go through our chat system and or send an email. So it kind of depends on how they like to communicate. If they're somebody who likes to talk, then we'll talk to them. If they and then we do have a conversation with them where we learn about the basics, make sure that it's in a state that we can help them with. If it's California, New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut, then we have lawyers who are licensed there. If it's a different state and the client is really, really hell-bent on working with us, then we can co-counsel with somebody in the state that they live in. Or if it's a state that has, where they're a student, we might be able to still represent them in a like a campus proceeding to get them a no contact order if their offenders is in school with them. But so we kind of have a screening to make sure that it's somebody with a problem that we can help them with. And then we have an hour-long Zoom with our director of clients relations to get get the details and to find out the goal. And sometimes the client knows the goal, sometimes it's something that we have to kind of tailor. And then Norma, our director of client relations, she and I have a conversation about every case, figure out if it's a case that makes sense for us and for the client. And then we propose a scope of work. The whole thing, we try to have happen within 1 or 2 days, especially in
Wow.
These are, it depends on the duration of the intake process, depends on the availability of the client, but usually these are the most urgent matters. We have a lot of other types of cases, litigation, lawsuits against big tech and stuff, but in stalking cases are really special to our firm because it's really what we were founded on. But also it's different than any other kind of case that we do because it is the harm is ongoing. In most of our litigations, the harm happened, and now we're dealing with the fallout and the pain and the tragedy and trying to hold somebody like responsible for it. But in stalking cases, the goal is not anything but just getting that to stop. We'll deal with it later. Once it stops, we'll deal later with what the other alternative options are. But the goal is just to get this really scary thing to stop, because in our country, it is it's like you have to have a court order to get somebody to stop contacting you. It's like everyone has the right to contact everyone else. That's like a kind of but then stalking proceedings for an order of protection are basically saying, I'm taking away your constitutional right to contact that other person.
Mm-hmm. And it's something we hear a lot too from folks, or that just about how, or like when dealing with law enforcement, especially, that like stalking is so context based, where it's like, well, it's not illegal to send somebody a piece of mail or just sit at a bus stop. But it's like, well, that bus stop is outside of this person's house and they've been there for 48 hours. And I know that comes into play. Is just one of the many like barriers that that victims face. One question I had, because you mentioned sort of the states that you represent, what happens with cases where either the victim is in a state that you represent, but the stalker isn't, or the other way around?
Well, so if the goal is to get an order of protection, usually we do that in the state where it kind of depends. If it's one of the 4 states, then we'll just do it in one of those 4 states. I've found that it's always best to do the legal action in the state where the offender is, because it's easier to enforce that. So in our country, you can have an order of protection from any of the 50 states, and it is supposed to be honored by any state. Okay, so like you can have, I could have a California order of protection, and if I'm now in New York, my offender is stalking me in New York, then I should be able to take this and have it be enforced. So that's good to know. You don't have to every time you move get a new one. But the reality is that if an offender is violating an order of protection from no matter where it was issued, the police that matter in those situations are the ones that are in closest proximity to the offender, because they're the ones who would actually arrest a person. And so like if my offender was in California, New York is not going to go and extradite that offender to New York and press charges, because they just won't prioritize. They could do that, but they won't prioritize it enough to spend those resources. So instead I would need to be seeking California's help, and with the goal of having the person be punished in California.
That's that's super interesting, and not something that's necessarily that intuitive.
Mm-hmm. But one thing is that if the goal is really to get the police to take action, because there's really 2 parallel systems. There's there's the criminal justice system where stalking is illegal in all of our states. You know, if somebody is contacting you repeatedly and causing you to fear through those unwanted contacts, then that's stalking. And so the goal of the criminal justice system is to, you know, basically punish an offender for breaking the law. The reality is that it can take a long time for them to take action against somebody for stalking, particularly if a lot of the evidence is electronic and they aren't necessarily motivated to go and subpoena the different platforms and things. It could take a very long time for that criminal complaint to get to the top of a pile where anything actually happens. There's actually a ton of advocacy that's required in cases like stalking or basically any intimate partner violence or sexual assault case. We see that it's not just a matter of going to a precinct and reporting it. You then have to follow up very diligently with detectives. So that's the criminal justice system. Usually when somebody is arrested, then the criminal justice system will issue an order of protection that forbids the offender from reaching out to the victim during the pendency of the case. And the hope usually is that however the case resolves, it includes an order of protection for the victim for several years. If there's a trial and the offender wins or something, then there's not going to be an order of protection that's issued. But the other alternative is for people to just petition them, you know, they're in the driver's seat and they can actually go to court and get an order of protection. Some places it's called a domestic violence order of protection, a harassment, TRO. There's a lot of different terms for it. Here in New York, it's called an order of protection. And you can go to family court and basically explain in papers what the course of conduct has been, how it's put you in fear. And then that very day, you can walk out of court. Sometimes it's remote in some places, and you'll have a temporary order of protection that then you serve, or you have a third party or a sheriff serve it on the offender. And as soon as the offender receives it, then like whatever no contact language is in the order of protection, that goes into effect as soon as they receive the order of protection. So that system, unlike the criminal justice system, kind of puts the survivor, the client, in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And then for folks that work with you, I know it's something where it's like each case has its own nuances, and also there's a lot of, you know, common patterns and everything. Do you have something you sort of like walk through your clients with of sort of what to expect? I know even with like an order of protection, you know, there's, you know, perpetrators who will say, well, it's a piece of paper, or people who are like, well, he doesn't have a fixed address, so we can't find him. And, you know, I don't know if that's something where you're preparing people to say like, this person may break it, and every time they do, it may lead you closer to you know, having like longer term protection. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like if there's certain things that you prep your clients for going through this process, which I imagine can sometimes take years.
Yeah, I mean, client prep is so super important because especially in cases where it's like the process is really stressful, like the idea that there could be confrontation with their offender, or that they're taking a firm stance and saying, here, I've gone to an authority that says you can't do this anymore. That might be in cases where there was an abusive relationship. That may be the first time in a long time that the abused party has taken a really firm, strong stance. Sometimes it happens when people are still married to each other, live with each other, have children or dogs in common, when there's still a lot of harm and retaliation that the offender could do. You know, we've had a lot of cases where they use the children as pawns, or the dogs, you know, like their lawsuits about the dogs in a lot of cases, or theft of the dogs. But getting, you know, just telling the client and like planning those things with the client is really important. You know, like, and it's, we always give clients my book, and we have some material, especially like on our website, about what to expect. But generally we let them know that it's actually, as long as we have a temporary order of protection, which usually goes into effect the day we get the day that we first even go to court, it's actually the duration of the court thing, the court proceeding actually becomes beneficial to the client, because every single court appearance, the temporary order of protection gets renewed. And so here in New York, it's uncommon for a judge to ever issue a final order of protection for more than 2 years at the end of it. So if a proceeding has lasted 6 months or a year, then that's an additional 6 months or a year to whatever the final outcome is. It's stressful to have it kind of go, you know, because of the threat of having to have more contact with the offender and not knowing what's going to happen at those court dates. But you know, the long-term benefit of the order itself is longer.
Right. That makes sense. And yeah, is still so hard to go through, but based on, but like compared to the alternative, is like at least a step sort of towards being able to just live in some semblance of peace.
Yes, I mean, it's so important to just start the process to get an order of protection, because then, I mean, like basically, a lot of law enforcers won't say that, you know, repeated conduct is harassment or stalking until there's been an unequivocal communication from the victim to the offender, or from like the victim's lawyer to the offender, that says you need to stop. And so so it's important to have that, whether it be in the form of a, you know, informal communication like a text or a letter, or a cease and desist from a lawyer, or a formal communication can also express that, you know, from a court saying this is an order of protection. But generally the more extreme the communications in content are, like the threats and the violence, the fewer there need to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. For folks who are like vetting a lawyer, I mean, you touched a bit on just the importance of having a lawyer who has dealt with cases like this before and has a sense of the blueprint and knows the laws and knows what to expect. Are there certain things just in terms of like folks vetting a lawyer, or like sort of like red flags that they should just be thoughtful about or careful about when engaging legal counsel?
I mean, I think the most important thing is just to like see if the lawyer has done, you know, cases before. A lot of times the lawyers that have the most experience, like in family court, are doing more like divorce law, where there's a lot more fighting about money and assets and resources and child custody. And so even though the same court oversees both types of cases, the lawyers don't always have a ton of familiarity with stalking. One thing that we do is, you know, sometimes we work with lawyers who maybe this isn't their bailiwick. It can be stressful for a lawyer that's doing it for the first time to deal with stalking, because sometimes the stalker will turn their attention onto the lawyer and will be harassing and threatening the lawyer, which if you're not used to it, can be scary and intimidating. Or the lawyer starts getting kind of paranoid or something about, you know, maybe they may not have a good sense of assessing the risk,
Right.
to the client and the risk to themselves. And I think that that's probably the biggest sort of issue in these cases, for who to hire, because there can't, you know, like the period after a breakup is where most intimate partner homicides happen. And so you don't want a lawyer who sends somebody really dangerous a cease and desist letter. You know, there's all these things, or like, you know, just says go break up without providing more safety planning and things. And there's all these like legal threats that a lawyer can make that might be really good if you're dealing with like a real estate dispute or something, but that don't, you know, that like if you know the tendencies of somebody who's stalking, like that could really put the victim in danger. So for instance, if the offender is somebody who doesn't have a job, doesn't have a family, doesn't have a lot of stability in their life, is showing impulsive and compulsive behavior, is showing up places, knows where the victim lives and works, is already making threats, has guns. Like, that is not somebody you send a cease and desist letter to. That person
Right.
you know, could go and blow the brains out of the victim. You know, that's a really dangerous thing to do. Instead, you know, that is, you know, like depending on the makeup of the offender, like that really dictates how we deal with the issue, you know, like whether we go straight to law enforcement. There's some situations where it's too risky to do anything but go straight to law enforcement, and where I'm actually, okay, like I will get you a order of protection, but you, like this guy is really, really unstable. We don't know where he is. And he's made all these in-person violent threats to you. He's, you know, like that suggests that he's homicidal or suicidal. Often somebody who is suicidal is also homicidal, where I'm like, I don't want you to be at home. You know, we've had situations, we've said, you need to flee. It's extreme, but like those are the kinds of assessments that we make, that somebody who's doing this kind of case for the first time would not be able to have the sample size to really know how to assess the risk.
Yeah. That's really helpful context, and just that there are tools, but it's like knowing how and when to use them appropriately.
Yeah.
I'm curious to get your thoughts. Last year, we talked to researcher Patrick Brady, and he spoke to our community about how prosecutors will sometimes use the threat of a stalking charge to get someone to take a plea to something like disturbing the peace. And he just kind of overall spoke about, like, you know, limited police resources, solvability factors, you know, a lack of understanding from police, lawyers, judges of how digital tools are used, how difficult the burden of proof can be in stalking cases. I'm just curious to hear sort of like if you can sort of expand upon that a bit, of just your experience and perspective.
Sure. So in terms of proof, there's more proof in a stalking case than any other case, because there's this, you know, it always is, there's too much proof for
Right.
law enforcement to sometimes even contain. So the burden of proof is not really an issue. In our, you know, we've had some cases where our stalkers are so digitally sophisticated and using all these anonymizing tools, softwares, VPNs, and things that the prosecutors, those are all like federal cyber stalking cases, the prosecutors have had trouble like digging and finding the things that actually connect this, like, you know, enormous amount of threatening behavior to the offender. But it's always possible though. Every single case like we have gotten them to make the connection, no matter how sophisticated and extreme it is. so, there is kind of that evidence issue, but in terms of like, no, there's, there's tons more evidence in stalking than there is in a physical assault or a sexual assault, because you're not dealing with things like consent or anything like that. And you're not dealing with physical evidence besides. So I disagree. But I disagree that there's a particularly rough burden of proof here. What we have though are law enforcers that just don't want to devote tons of resources. And the fact is that almost all crimes and all civil cases too, no matter if you're, suing for a trip and fall or a car accident, or somebody's being arrested for burglary, almost all cases do plead or do settle. They don't go to trial. And that's because both parties don't want the risk of losing. And so it's not like unique to stalking that that there would be a plea to a lesser offense, because that's just how our criminal justice system works. And sometimes it can actually be a very good outcome for there to be a plea that minimizes the client's involvement in some way. Like they don't have to go through the hell of a criminal trial and having to be in proximity with their offender being questioned and such. And the sentence might not be that different. So that's kind of my two issue.
That's really helpful context too, and yeah, information for people to be sort of armed with. I'm curious, I know we have to let you go soon, but are there things in the sort of like landscape of your work that give you sort of like hope for the direction that we're going as like a society, as a country, the culture, anything like that?
Well, I think that, I think in the last few years, there has been a lot more like legal options for victims of stalking. Just, like when I started my firm, there were 3 states that had criminal laws that criminalize the non-consensual sharing of sex images and videos, and that was a really common tool that was used by stalkers, and there were entire websites devoted to it. And Google would, if you Googled a person's name, then Google still at that time would direct people to those websites, and there could be pages and pages of those revenge porn links if you typed a person's name in. Google didn't care. So we've gotten a lot of buy-in from the tech industry and Google and the search terms to stop linking non-consensual porn to victims' names. And there's not the ubiquity of those websites, because a lot of those have, like, the main ones all went out of business. And like and also even the porn companies stopped, they've been okay about content removal, like Pornhub and stuff. So, that gives me some hope. There's still states like New York where you can only get an order of protection against somebody that you're like related to or had an intimate relationship with. So we have, at our firm, we've drafted something called the 21st Century Anti-Stalking Bill, which intends to modernize the legislation around stalking, because we all know that stalking is not limited to just exes and family members doing it to one another. But with the internet, we've never been more connected. It's really easy for a stranger to get fixated, or somebody that through an app or a platform that then starts harassing you offline. And so it's a really big limitation to not, for to not have any recourse besides the criminal justice system. So I'm really hopeful that we can get that passed. A lot of other states do have harassment orders of protections that don't limit it to the relationship between the two. But it's particularly important for journalists and celebrities and politicians who tend to be the clients of ours, or influencers or content creators, or anybody who's doing any kind of controversial work. Those are the people that we see getting stalked by strangers or super fans or people that did love them and maybe are dealing with some mental health problems and go from really loving and adoring a person to wanting to kill them.
Right. And I think it's interesting too, like how, and that's Lily's story. She was a dancer and on tour in Europe. And, so somebody who's in the public eye and also, in that way, but also not somebody who's like Taylor Swift or Matthew McConaughey, who can hire security and all of these things that just have, because it is so expensive to be a victim of stalking. So but it's something that, as we also put ourselves out there more on the internet or whatever, that there's that risk of it as well.
Yeah, totally. And it's really scary also for people that are kind of newly public, people who are just becoming more well-known, like content creators, and it sucks to have to say, like, this is actually like what you're going to experience as your fame rises. Like, this is, this is something that has to be managed and isn't necessarily going to go away. That sucks to have to say, to say that this is a result of your success.
Right.
But it, it seems almost like blaming, but it is the real risk.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I know we don't have time to really get in depth in it, but also what you said up top about the judge telling you had a First Amendment issue just with the past year and the Counterman case. And, I don't know if that's something where, we have seen sort of like mixed things about what that actually meant, and sort of like what, the wrenches that did or didn't throw into the legal systems. I don't know if you have like a quick snapshot opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, that like for our viewers and listeners, that was a case, an intimate partner violence case, and the second of that we've had in about a decade, where the Supreme Court was tasked with determining whether the threatening speech of the offender was speech, and to what extent they were entitled to the First Amendment protection, and this case was it was very clear stalking and super abusive language and threatening language, and the court ultimately said that it was constitutional, and that usually the issue is whether the law is constitutional. We can go into it. Maybe you'll have me back.
Yes, would love that. Well,
yeah, is, like, it's not something that victims should worry about when they report something or try to get order of protection. It's like they should go and pursue those things, and it's up to the lawyers to duke out the whether the laws are constitutional.
That makes sense. Yes, and we would love to have you back. I know we've just kind of scratched the surface, and I know, we have to let you go to keep fighting the stalkers and pervs and trolls out there that are harming our community. But thank you again just so much for your time. We'll be sure to send out all the links to your book and resources and everything, but just really appreciate you taking the time and your insight and just the incredible work that you do.
Well, I am just so grateful for you and Lily for just having a clearinghouse, having a place for us all to come and seeing stalking as something that needs to be stopped and it needs, you know, that everyone needs to understand better. Because it is scary and there's no way if you're the victim of it, it's just hard to be distracted from it. It just encompasses a person's whole life. Being scared isn't fun and it's not fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Carrie. Till next time.
Okay, till next time. Thanks, Lauren.
Bye.